The church bell echoed through Redemption Creek as wealthy cattle baron James Holloway stood in borrowed rags, watching three well-dressed women step off the afternoon stage. His secret? He owned half the territory, the sprawling Double H Ranch, the general store, the bank, and thousands of head of cattle. But today he was just Jim, a simple ranch hand with dust on his boots and patches on his shirt. "This is madness, James," his foreman whispered beside him. Maybe it was. But James had watched his father's fourth wife walk away with a fortune, and his brother's marriage crumble when the money dried up during the drought of '81. Every woman who'd courted him saw only dollar signs, their eyes lighting up at his silver belt buckle, his tailored suits, his champion horses. Not this time. The advertisement had been simple. Ranch hand seeking honest woman for companionship and marriage. Modest means but strong character. 3 women had responded, traveling from as far as St. Louis and Denver. They expected a poor cowboy with just enough to get by. But there was a 4th woman, one he hadn't expected. She descended last, carrying a single worn carpetbag, her gray dress simple and mended at the sleeves. She didn't scan the crowd eagerly like the others. She simply stood there, quiet as Sunday morning, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. Question for you. Would you pretend to be poor to find true love? Let me know in the comments below. Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, had seen its share of mail-order bride arrangements, but never quite like this. The year was 1887, and the town of 300 souls buzzed with gossip about the 4 women who'd come seeking a mysterious ranch hand named Jim. James Holloway adjusted his worn hat and approached the waiting women, his heart hammering against his ribs. At 34, he'd built an empire from nothing, turning his father's failing ranch into the most prosperous spread in 3 territories. He could calculate cattle prices in his head faster than the bank's adding machine, negotiate deals that left railroad tycoons speechless, and outwork any hand on his payroll. But finding a woman who loved him, not his money, had proven impossible. The first woman he met was Victoria Thornton from St. Louis. She extended a gloved hand, her traveling suit pristine despite the dusty journey. "You must be Jim. Your letter was quite earnest." Her nose wrinkled slightly at his appearance, and James noticed how her eyes scanned the street, already calculating, measuring. He'd seen that look before, in his stepmother's eyes before she tried to convince his dying father to change his will. "Ma'am," he said simply, keeping his posture humble, his voice rough. "Welcome to Redemption Creek." The second woman, Margaret Chun, was the daughter of a San Francisco merchant. She smiled warmly but couldn't hide her disappointment when she saw his patched clothing. "I expected Montana to be different," she said carefully. "More prosperous, perhaps." The third, Dorothy Hayes from Denver, was frank in her assessment. "Your letter mentioned a homestead. How many acres exactly?" "Enough to get by," James replied, which was technically true. The Double H Ranch's 47,000 acres were certainly enough to get by. Then there was the 4th woman. Her name was Sarah Brennan, and she hadn't responded to his advertisement at all. As James would later learn, she'd come to Redemption Creek to work as a schoolteacher, replacing old Miss Hadley who'd retired to live with her sister in Bozeman. The stage line had mixed up the passengers, and Sarah had been mistakenly grouped with the 3 bride candidates. "I'm terribly sorry," Sarah said softly when the confusion was discovered. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but something in its tone made James lean closer to listen. "I'm not here for. I'm the new schoolteacher." She was plain by society's standards. Brown hair pulled back simply, no bustle or fancy trim on her dress, freckles across her nose from sun exposure. But her eyes were extraordinary, gray-green like sage after rain, and deeply intelligent. When she looked at him, she seemed to actually see him, not just his clothes or his supposed prospects. "No harm done, miss," James said, tipping his hat. "Welcome all the same." The local minister, Reverend Walsh, stepped forward to help sort out the confusion. It was he who'd helped James arrange this unconventional courtship, the only person in town who knew the cattle baron's true identity. "Ladies, we've arranged rooms at the boarding house," Walsh announced. "Tomorrow, You'll each have the opportunity to spend time with Jim here. Get to know each other properly before any decisions are made. That evening, James sat with his foreman, Tom Hutchins, in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Tom was the only person besides Walsh who knew about the deception. "That's Sarah Brennan," Tom said, packing his pipe. "She's not even one of the bride candidates. Why do you keep looking toward the boarding house like a moonstruck calf?" James didn't have an answer, but he couldn't shake the image of Sarah standing apart from the others, not pushing forward, not demanding attention. While the other women had chattered nervously or asked probing questions, Sarah had simply observed, her quiet presence somehow more notable than all their words combined. "What do you know about her?" James asked. Tom shrugged. "Came from Ohio. Been teaching there for 6 years. Lost both parents to influenza last winter. Wanted a fresh start." He paused. "She requested books as part of her salary. Not more money, books for the school." James smiled. The current school had maybe 15 books total, most falling apart. "What kind of books?" "Shakespeare, science texts, history, mathematics primers." Said she wanted the children here to have the same education as city kids. That night, James lay in his bed at the ranch house, 3 miles outside town where none of the women would see it, and thought about the strange turn his plan had taken. He'd prepared to court 3 women while pretending to be poor. He hadn't prepared for a 4th who wasn't courting him at all. The next morning, he dressed again in his borrowed work clothes and rode into town on Dusty, the oldest, most unremarkable horse in his stable, leaving his prized Palomino, Golden Sun, in the barn. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was hiding everything that usually defined him, hoping to find someone who'd value what remained. The Victorian ladies were already waiting at the restaurant, dressed in their finest. Victoria had chosen a burgundy dress with elaborate beading. Margaret wore silk imported from her father's shop. Dorothy's outfit was practical but expensive, proper Denver fashion. And across the street, he glimpsed Sarah through the schoolhouse window. She'd already begun work, even though school wouldn't start for another week. She was on a ladder, washing windows, her sleeves rolled up, her hair escaping its pins. She wasn't waiting for him at all. Somehow, that made him want to talk to her more than anything. James spent the morning with Victoria Thornton, walking through town as she described her life in St. Louis. Her father owned a textile factory, and she'd grown up in society, attending cotillions and charity functions. "Of course, I'm willing to adapt to frontier life," she said, stepping carefully around a mud puddle. "Though I must admit, I expected a ranch hand to at least own his own property. You do have some land claim filed, don't you?" "Working on it, ma'am," James replied, watching her face carefully. Her smile tightened. "I see. Well, hard work is admirable. My father started with nothing, you know. Of course, he had nothing when he married Mother, too. She often reminds him how she took a chance on him." The implication was clear. Victoria saw herself as doing a poor cowboy a favor. Afternoon brought Margaret Chen, who was considerably kinder but no less concerned about practical matters. They sat in the town's small restaurant, and she spoke honestly about her situation. "My father wants me to marry a white man," she said quietly. "He thinks it will help the family business, help us be accepted. I want to choose someone kind, someone steady." Your letter seemed sincere. She paused. "But I need to know. Can you provide? I don't need luxury, but I need security." James respected her honesty. "I work steady. Never missed a paycheck. Boss thinks highly of me." All true statements, technically. Margaret studied him. "There's something about you that doesn't quite fit," she said slowly. "You speak well. Better than most ranch hands I've met at Father's store. And your hands, they're calloused, yes, but—" She looked away. "Forgive me. I'm too observant sometimes." Evening meant Dorothy Hayes, the most practical of the 3. She arrived with a list, actual paper with written questions. "How much do you earn monthly? Do you have savings? What are your prospects for advancement? Do you drink excessively? Gamble? Any debts?" James answered each question carefully, providing enough truth to satisfy without revealing too much. Yes, he had savings. No, he didn't gamble or drink to excess. His prospects were good. Children? Dorothy asked. I want 4, maybe 5. I come from a large family. Can you support that many on a ranch hand's wages? Children are a blessing, James said. Money finds a way when there's love and hard work. Dorothy's expression suggested she found this answer naively romantic. After seeing Dorothy back to the boarding house, James found himself walking past the schoolhouse again. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Sarah was still there, working late. He shouldn't disturb her. She wasn't one of the candidates. She'd made it clear the stage mix-up was just a mistake. He knocked anyway. Sarah appeared at the door, smudges of dust on her face, cobwebs in her hair. Oh, Mr. Jim, was it? Can I help you? Saw your light burning. Just wanted to make sure everything was all right. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from anyone all day. I'm afraid I lost track of time. I was organizing the books, and then I noticed the roof had a leak, and the reader's bench was wobbly. She laughed softly. I tend to get absorbed in projects. Mind if I look at that bench? Handy with repairs. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. I wouldn't want to impose. The schoolhouse was tiny, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with rough-hewn desks and a pot-bellied stove. But Sarah had already transformed it. The windows sparkled. Books were arranged by subject. She'd even drawn a colorful alphabet on the chalkboard, each letter decorated with tiny animals and plants. James knelt by the bench, examining the loose leg. You did all this today? I like to keep busy, and I want the children to feel welcome when school starts. She sat at the teacher's desk, watching him work. You're good at that. My pa taught me. Said a man who can't fix things is helpless in this world. True enough. His father had said that, though he'd also owned enough money to hire fixers. The real lesson had been about self-reliance, not necessity. Are you nervous? Sarah asked suddenly. About tomorrow, you'll have to choose, won't you? Among the 3 women, James considered while tightening a bolt. Not sure I'll choose any of them. Oh, she sounded surprised. They're all quite accomplished. Victoria is elegant, Margaret is clever, and Dorothy is very practical. And you? The question slipped out. What are you? Sarah laughed quietly. I'm the one who wasn't invited to the party. I'm just the schoolteacher, remember? James stood, testing the bench. Solid now. You haven't asked me a single question about my finances or prospects. Why? She tilted her head, considering. Would you like me to? Most women do. I'm not most women, Mr. Jim. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. I came here to teach, to build something meaningful. I've learned that money comes and goes. My father was wealthy once, lost everything in a bad investment, built it back up, then lost it all again to medical bills. What mattered in the end wasn't the money. It was that we loved each other, that we faced things together. Sounds like he was a good man. The best. Her voice caught slightly. He taught school too before the business. He always said that a person's character is built in quiet moments, not loud ones. The choices we make when no one's watching, that's who we really are. James moved to stand beside her. Your students are lucky to have you. I hope so. I hope I can make a difference here. She turned to face him, those sage-colored eyes serious. Can I give you some advice, Jim? About your decision. Please. Choose the woman who asks about your dreams, not your dollars. The woman who wants to know what makes you laugh, what keeps you awake at night, what you'd do if money wasn't a concern at all. She smiled sadly. The woman who'd love you in rags or riches, that's the one worth keeping. James's throat tightened. And if I've already met her? Sarah looked confused for just a moment. Then her eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. But before she could respond, voices outside interrupted them. Victoria and Margaret, walking past with Dorothy, arm in arm, already forming alliances. I should go, Sarah said quickly. Thank you for fixing the bench. James walked back to where Tom waited with the horses, his mind churning. He'd started this deception to find a woman who'd love him without his money. Now he'd found her, and she wasn't even looking for him. The next morning brought unexpected complications. A telegram arrived at the general store, and by noon, the whole town knew. Cattle prices had spiked dramatically due to drought in Texas. Anyone with herds to sell stood to make a fortune. "Jim, you hear the news?" Tom found James at the livery stable. "Prices are up 40%. We need to move cattle to market now, or we'll miss the window." James glanced around nervously. "Keep your voice down. The Double H can wait a few more days." "Wait? Are you insane? We're talking about $100,000. Maybe more." That evening was the town's monthly social, a dance held in the church hall. All three women expected James to attend, to dance with them, to continue the courtship. But as he stood outside the hall, adjusting his simple shirt and worn vest, he felt like a fraud. Victoria swept up to him immediately. "Jim, wasn't that news about cattle prices exciting? I was just telling Margaret. Imagine if you owned a herd right now. You'd be rich overnight." She laughed, not knowing how literally true that statement was. "But I suppose ranch hands don't own the cattle, do they? Just move them around for men with actual capital." Her tone wasn't cruel, just matter-of-fact, but it stung nevertheless. Margaret was gentler. "Victoria doesn't mean to be insensitive. She's just very focused on financial security." "And you're not?" James asked. Margaret considered this carefully. "I'm focused on honesty, on knowing where I stand. My father built his business through hard work and transparency. I value those things." She looked at him directly. "Are you being honest with us, Jim? Something about this whole arrangement feels unusual." Before James could answer, Dorothy interrupted. "The fiddler's starting. Are you going to dance with each of us? Or should we draw straws?" The evening became an awkward rotation. James danced with Victoria, who criticized his simple steps while describing the elaborate balls she'd attended in St. Louis. He danced with Dorothy, who used the time to discuss household budgets and livestock management with surprising expertise. He danced with Margaret, who remained quiet and watchful, her earlier question about honesty hanging between them. Then he saw Sarah. She'd come to the dance alone, wearing the same gray dress but with a pretty shawl that brought out the green in her eyes. She wasn't on the dance floor. Instead, she stood with a group of children, teaching them a clapping game, laughing at their enthusiasm. The schoolteacher had found her people already. James excused himself from Victoria mid-sentence and walked across the hall. "May I have this dance, Miss Brennan?" Sarah looked startled. "Oh, shouldn't you be dancing with?" She gestured toward the three women, who were watching with various expressions of surprise and annoyance. "I'm asking you." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The fiddle started a waltz, and they moved together onto the floor. Sarah was light on her feet, graceful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive dance lessons and everything to do with natural rhythm. "You're causing a scandal," she whispered. "They're all staring. Let them stare. Tell me about Ohio." So she did. As they danced, Sarah spoke about her childhood, about her father's love of learning, about teaching in a one-room schoolhouse where children came from farms miles away, some walking through snow to get their education. She talked about books and ideas, about wanting to expand minds and open possibilities. "My father used to say that education is the great equalizer," Sarah said. "A poor man with knowledge can rise. A rich man without it will fall. Money is temporary. What you can create with your mind and hands, that's permanent." Sounds like a wise man. He was. He and Mother worked together. She taught music and art, he taught everything else. They had almost nothing materially, but they were rich in the things that mattered. Her eyes grew distant. "When they died, I realized I could stay in Ohio with my memories, or I could honor them by continuing their work somewhere I was really needed." "Montana's lucky to have you." Sarah smiled. "Montana hasn't met me yet. School starts Monday. Ask me then how lucky they feel." The dance ended, and James reluctantly released her hand. But as they stepped apart, Victoria appeared at his elbow. "That was quite a display," she said coolly. "I wasn't aware the schoolteacher was part of this courtship arrangement." "She's not," Sarah said quickly. "I apologize if—" "Don't apologize." James surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. "I asked Miss Brennan to dance. There's no rule saying I can't be friendly to the new schoolteacher." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "No, no rule at all. Just common courtesy to the women who traveled hundreds of miles to meet you." She turned sharply and walked away. Margaret approached more carefully. "She's right, you know. If you're not serious about this arrangement, you should say so. It's not fair to keep us waiting." "You're right," James said. "I'll make my decision known soon." After Margaret walked away, Sarah touched his arm gently. "You should choose one of them. They've invested so much in coming here. What if I told you none of them are right? Then why did you send for them?" James almost told her everything then, about the money, the ranch, the deception. But Reverend Walsh appeared, pulling him aside urgently. "James, we have a problem. There's been an accident at the Double H. One of the hands is injured and they need you at the ranch now." The ride to the Double H took 20 minutes at a gallop. When James arrived, still in his simple clothes, he found his ranch foreman and the local doctor tending to a young cowhand named Billy who'd been thrown by a horse. "Broke his leg clean through," the doctor said. "He'll be laid up for months." Billy was crying, not from pain but from fear. "Mr. Holloway, I'm sorry. I know I can't work. You'll have to let me go. And I got Ma depending on my wages. And, easy son." James knelt beside the boy. "You're not going anywhere. You'll heal up at the ranch, full wages, and your Ma will get extra supplies from the store. Understand?" The gratitude in Billy's eyes made James's chest tight. Tom pulled him aside. "Boss, about those cattle prices. We really need to make a decision. How long do we have?" 2, maybe 3 days before the market shifts again." James nodded slowly. 3 days. Enough time to end this charade, reveal the truth, and see who these women and Sarah really were when everything came to light. "All right. Tomorrow I make my choice." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. James attended church in town, sitting in his usual back pew, dressed in his poor man's clothes. The 3 bride candidates sat together near the front, their Sunday best on display. Sarah sat alone on the side, a Bible in her lap, already making notes for her first week of school. Reverend Walsh's sermon seemed aimed directly at James. "The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." The irony wasn't lost on him. After the service, James asked all 3 women to meet him at the restaurant for lunch. His announcement would affect them all, and they deserved to hear it together. Victoria arrived first, dressed in emerald silk that must have cost more than most ranch hands earned in a year. Margaret came in simpler attire but equally elegant. Dorothy wore practical Sunday clothes, her expression businesslike as always. "Ladies," James began, his throat dry, "I appreciate you all coming to Redemption Creek. You've been patient and kind, and you deserve honesty in return." Victoria's face fell. "You're choosing someone else." "I'm not choosing any of you," James said carefully. "But before you get angry, there's something you need to know about me. Something I should have told you from the start." He explained the deception then, the wealth, the ranch, the reason for his disguise. With each word, their expressions changed in different ways. Victoria's shock turned to anger. "You've been lying this entire time? Making us believe you were poor when you're actually—" She stood abruptly. "This is unconscionable. I've been perfectly pleasant to a man in rags when I could have been treated as befits my station." "That's exactly the point," James said quietly. "I needed to know who'd value me regardless of station. And we failed your little test?" Victoria's voice dripped with sarcasm. "How convenient for you, Mr. Holloway. You get to judge us while hiding behind lies." She grabbed her purse. "I'm taking the next stage back to St. Louis. And I'll be telling everyone I know about your deceptive little game." She swept out, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Margaret spoke next, her voice thoughtful rather than angry. I'm not upset about the money. I'm upset about the dishonesty. You said you value transparency, yet you built this entire courtship on deception. You're right, James admitted. I should have found another way. But I understand why you did it, Margaret continued. My father faces similar issues. Every man who courts me, he wonders, do they want Margaret? Or do they want the merchant's daughter with the dowry? She smiled sadly. The answer is usually the latter. So I understand your dilemma, even if I can't condone your method. Are you leaving too? I am. But not because you're rich or poor, because I deserve someone who trusts me enough to be honest from the start. I hope you find what you're looking for, Mr. Holloway. I truly do. She rose gracefully and left. Dorothy remained seated, her expression unreadable. Finally, she laughed. A genuine, surprised sound. Well, this is unexpected. You know what's funny? I actually liked you better as poor Jim. James blinked. What? Rich Jim seems complicated. All this deception and testing. Poor Jim was straightforward, a working man who wanted a partner. That's refreshing. She stood, extending her hand for a shake. But Margaret's right. The dishonesty is a problem. I need a partner I can trust, and you've proven you're willing to lie when it suits you. I'll be heading back to Denver. I understand. I'm sorry for wasting your time. You didn't waste it. I learned something valuable, that I'd rather have an honest poor man than a deceptive rich one. That's worth the train ticket. She paused at the door. One more thing. That schoolteacher, Sarah? She wasn't part of your test, which means every moment you spent with her was real. Think about that. After they all left, James sat alone in the restaurant, feeling the weight of his choices. Tom found him there an hour later. Heard it went well? Tom said sarcastically, sliding into the booth. I'm an idiot. Yep, but we already knew that. Tom signaled for coffee. So what now? Now I go talk to Sarah and apologize for this whole mess. She got caught up in my deception without even being part of it. You think she'll want anything to do with you after this? James didn't have an answer. He found Sarah at the schoolhouse that afternoon, preparing lessons for the next day. She looked up when he entered, and he could see she'd already heard the news. It's true then? She asked quietly. You're actually James Holloway, the cattle baron? Yes, the same James Holloway who owns this building, and the land the school sits on. Yes. Sarah set down her chalk slowly. Did you know who I was? When you first saw me at the stage? No, you weren't part of the plan at all. But you let me believe you were poor. You fixed that bench, talked to me about your boss, about working steady. She shook her head. I told you about my father, about how money comes and goes. I must have sounded so naive to a millionaire. You sounded wise, James said urgently. Everything you said was true. You reminded me what actually matters. Don't. Sarah held up a hand. Don't make me part of your revelation. I'm not a lesson you learned or a test you passed. I'm just the schoolteacher who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sarah. Miss Brennan, she corrected firmly. I think we should keep things professional, Mr. Holloway. You're the owner of the school building, and I'm your employee. Let's keep it that way. James felt something crack in his chest. If that's what you want. It is. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, every word I said to you was true. Every moment we spent together was real. You were never part of the test because you were never part of the deception. You saw poor Jim and you didn't ask for anything. That means everything. Goodbye, Mr. Holloway. James walked out into the fading sunlight, realizing he'd found exactly what he was looking for, and lost it through his own machinations. The next few weeks were the longest of James's life. He threw himself into ranch work, moving the cattle to market and reaping the profits from the price spike. The sale brought in nearly $150,000, enough to expand the Double H significantly. But the money felt hollow. He saw Sarah occasionally in town, always from a distance. She'd started school, and by all accounts, the children adored her. She'd somehow convinced the town council to fund more books, organized a reading club for adults in the evenings, and started a small lending library in the schoolhouse. She was building something meaningful, just as she'd said she wanted to. James tried to respect her wishes and keep his distance. But Tom had other ideas. "You're moping like a kicked dog," his foreman said one evening. "It's pathetic. She doesn't want to see me. So make her want to. Show her you're not just some rich man playing games. Show her you're worth her time." "How?" Tom grinned. "You're a smart man. Figure it out." The idea came to James that night. Sarah wanted books for her school. He'd give her a library. Not just a few shelves, but a real library building, filled with books from floor to ceiling. She wanted the children of Redemption Creek to have the same education as city kids. He'd make sure they had even better. But he'd do it right this time. No deception. No games. The next morning, James rode into town in his usual clothes. The good ones this time, no more pretending. He found Sarah supervising her students during recess, teaching them about the constellations they'd study that night. "Miss Brennan, might I have a word?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded, asking her oldest student to watch the others. "I have a business proposal," James said formally. "I'm not interested in. Please, just hear me out." He pulled out a rolled paper architectural drawings. "This is a library. 2 stories, room for thousands of books, reading rooms, study areas. I want to build it here in Redemption Creek and stock it with educational materials. I'm asking you to oversee the project. Choose the books, design the layout, make it what this town needs." Sarah studied the drawings, her expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because you were right. Education is the great equalizer. These children deserve every opportunity, and you're the person who can give it to them." He paused. "And because I'm trying to be the man you thought I was. The one who cares about things that matter. This would cost thousands of dollars. I have thousands of dollars. It would take months to complete. I have months." Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, searching for something in his face. "Is this about me? About trying to win me over?" "Honestly, yes and no." James met her gaze steadily. "Yes, I want to prove I'm worthy of your respect. But no, I'd build this library even if you never spoke to me again because it's the right thing to do. You taught me that the choices we make when no one's watching define who we are. Consider this my choice. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need." 3 days later, Sarah appeared at the Double H Ranch. James was in the corral working with a young horse when he saw her approaching. He climbed down from the fence, his heart racing. "I'll do it," Sarah said without preamble. "I'll oversee the library project. But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, this isn't about courting. This is about education. We keep things professional." "Agreed." "Second, I want input on everything, not just books, but the building design, the operating rules, who has access. This library serves everyone, not just the wealthy." "Of course." "Third." She hesitated. "Third, I want to understand why you really did all this. The deception, the testing. Not the surface reason, the real one." James gestured to a bench under a cottonwood tree. They sat, and he told her everything. He spoke about his father's 4 marriages, each ending in betrayal or heartbreak. About watching his mother work herself to death trying to keep up with his father's first fortune, only to be replaced by a younger woman when she became ill. About his brother's marriage that fell apart when money got tight. His wife leaving with their children and half the ranch. "I've seen what money does to people," James said quietly. "How it changes them, corrupts them. I built the Double H from almost nothing after my father died. Worked 20-hour days, made sacrifices most men can't imagine. And every woman who looked at me saw only dollar signs." He picked up a leaf, turning it over in his hands. "I wanted to find someone who'd value me. Just me. The man without the money attached." "But that's not who you are," Sarah said gently. "You can't separate yourself from what you've built. The ranch, the business success, that's part of you too. It shows your intelligence, your work ethic, your vision. Pretending to be poor wasn't showing your true self. It was showing an incomplete self." The simple truth of her words struck him hard. "You're right," he admitted. "I thought I was being clever, but I was just being a coward. Afraid of being hurt again, so I hid. Created a test no one could pass because I'd rigged it from the start. At least you understand that now." Sarah stood, brushing off her skirt. "So here's my real condition, Mr. Holloway. If we're going to work together on this library, I need you to be honest. All the time. About everything. No games, no tests, no pretending. Can you do that?" James stood as well, extending his hand. "I can. I promise." They shook on it, and James felt something shift between them. Not romance, not yet, but possibility. As Sarah walked back to her horse, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and Mr. Holloway, you should know. I would have liked you just as much if you'd been honest from the start. Maybe more. Something to think about." Then she rode away, leaving James standing there with the first real hope he'd felt in weeks. Construction on the Redemption Creek Library began in October. James hired the best builders in the territory, and Sarah proved to be an exacting overseer. She wanted windows positioned for optimal reading light, shelves at heights children could reach, comfortable chairs for elderly patrons, and a separate room for town meetings and lectures. They met 3 times a week to discuss progress, and slowly, carefully, a friendship developed. James learned that Sarah was funny, dry and witty in unexpected moments. She learned that James wasn't just a businessman. He loved astronomy, read poetry, and could recite entire passages from Shakespeare. The wealthy cattle baron and the quiet schoolteacher found common ground in books and ideas. But they kept things professional, just as Sarah had insisted. Until the day of the blizzard. It hit in late November, a massive storm that dumped 3 feet of snow and dropped temperatures below zero. Sarah had stayed late at the schoolhouse, and by the time she tried to ride home to her boarding house, visibility was nearly zero. James found her halfway there, her horse having thrown a shoe. She was shivering violently, ice forming on her coat. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, wrapping her in his own coat and lifting her onto his horse. "The boarding house is too far. We're going to the ranch." Sarah was too cold to argue. At the Double H, James's housekeeper, Mrs. Chan, Margaret's aunt, who'd stayed on despite her niece's departure, fussed over Sarah, providing hot tea and warm blankets by the fire. As feeling returned to Sarah's fingers and toes, she looked around the ranch house with wide eyes. It was beautiful but not ostentatious. Books lined every wall. Art depicted Western landscapes. Everything spoke of comfort and culture, not just wealth. "Your home is lovely," she said softly. "Thank you. I'll have Tom take you back to town once the storm passes." But the storm didn't pass. It intensified, becoming one of the worst blizzards in Montana history. Sarah was stranded at the Double H for 3 days. Those 3 days changed everything. Without the formal structure of their library meetings, without the town watching, they simply talked. James showed Sarah his favorite constellation through his telescope. Sarah read aloud from his collection of Whitman poetry. They played chess. She won twice. They debated philosophy and laughed over shared memories of difficult students and stubborn cattle. On the second night, sitting by the fire, Sarah finally asked the question she'd been holding back. "Why me, James? And don't say it's because I didn't ask about money. There has to be more to it than that." James stared into the flames, considering. "Do you remember that first day at the stage? Everyone else was pushing forward, demanding attention, making their presence known. You stood apart watching a hawk. You weren't trying to be noticed. You were just being, existing in the moment. That's just who I am." "I know. And it's extraordinary." He turned to face her. "You remind me that quiet strength is still strength. That wisdom doesn't need to shout. That love, real love, doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It builds slowly in small moments, in fixed benches and shared books and honest conversations." Sarah's eyes glistened. "You said love." "I did. We agreed to keep things professional. We did. And if you want to maintain that agreement, I'll respect it. But you asked for honesty, so here it is. I love you, Sarah Brennan. I love your quiet confidence, your dedication to those children, your wisdom that cuts through nonsense. I love how you see people, really see them, beneath all their pretense and performance. You saw me when I was pretending to be poor, and somehow you see me now when I'm trying to be better. James, I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm just being honest, like you asked. Sarah stood and walked to the window, watching snow swirl in the darkness. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I was so angry when I learned the truth, not because you were rich, but because I thought every moment we'd shared was contaminated by lies. I couldn't trust my own feelings. And now I've seen you for weeks, being honest, working hard on the library, treating everyone with respect. I've seen you with your ranch hands. You know all their names, their families, their struggles. I've watched you donate anonymously to families in need. I've seen who you are when no one's watching. She turned to face him. And I've realized something. The man who fixed my bench and the man who's building a library are the same person. The money didn't change you. It just gave you more power to do good. James crossed the room slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying that I fell in love with poor Jim because he was kind and genuine. And I'm falling in love with James Holloway for the same reasons. She smiled, tears on her cheeks. The quiet love you mentioned? The kind that builds slowly? I think we've been building it all along. I was just too stubborn to admit it. He kissed her then, gentle and tentative, and she kissed him back with quiet certainty. The library opened in March, the finest building in 3 territories. At the dedication ceremony, James gave a speech about education and opportunity. But it was Sarah's words that made people cry. My father taught me that the best gift you can give someone is the tools to build their own future, she said, her quiet voice somehow carrying to every corner of the crowded room. This library is that gift. Books that will teach you anything you want to learn. Space to dream and study and grow. Mr. Holloway provided the building, but the real wealth in these walls is knowledge. Take it, use it, build something beautiful with it. They married in June, a simple ceremony at the church. Victoria sent a surprisingly gracious letter of congratulation from St. Louis, where she'd married a banker. Margaret attended in person, delighted that her aunt would now be Sarah's housekeeper too. Dorothy couldn't make it, but sent a practical set of kitchen knives and a note. For the honest life you both deserve. On their wedding night, in the ranch house that was now their home, Sarah gave James a gift. A book she'd written herself, carefully bound. What is this? Our story. I wrote it down exactly as it happened. The deception, the courtship, the lessons learned. I thought maybe someday our children should know the truth about how we met. James read the first page, then looked at his wife with wonder. You're not angry anymore? About how it started? Oh, I'm still a little angry about the deception, Sarah said with a slight smile. But I'm grateful for what it taught us both. You learned that real love doesn't fear honesty. I learned that people are more than their bank accounts, and that includes the wealthy. We both learned that the quietest love is often the strongest. She curled against him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold. The millionaire cowboy had found his wife, not by pretending to be someone else, but by learning to be honest about who he really was. And the quiet schoolteacher had found her partner, not in spite of his wealth, but because of the character he showed in how he used it. In the years that followed, the Redemption Creek Library became famous throughout the West. Sarah ran it while continuing to teach, and James expanded his business while funding educational initiatives across the territory. They had 4 children, each taught to value character over currency, wisdom over wealth. But the real legacy wasn't the library or the ranch or the fortune. It was the truth they'd learned and lived. That love proves itself not in grand gestures or perfect beginnings, but in the quiet, honest moments when 2 people choose each other. Completely, honestly, and without pretense. And in Redemption Creek, Montana, where Wild West stories were as common as sagebrush, the tale of the millionaire cowboy and the quiet schoolteacher became the favorite. Not because it was the loudest or most dramatic, but because it reminded people that the truest treasures in life are built slowly, honestly, and with love. The end.